Okay, as in go? Sorry, 1 second.
Forktales, a podcast that feeds the food and beverage world.
Oh, awesome. Forktales is brought to you by Vigor, a branding and marketing agency for passion-driven, innovative restaurant, beverage, and hospitality brands. Learn more at vigorbranding.com. If you love what we're serving up, please give Forktales a 5-star review on your podcast service of choice. Think of it as a tip for good service. Hey everyone, today I'm joined by my friend Alistair Levine. He is a partner, business development at KitchenSync, which we're going to dive into. Alistair, say hello, give a little bit of backstory.
Yeah, how's it going? So, I'm a partner at KitchenSync. We provide a suite of back office or outsourced sort of corporate office services for the independent restaurant space. I also own 7 restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area as well. So sort of get to sit on both sides of the fence, which gives us some, both at KitchenSync and on the restaurant side, a unique perspective and a window into sort of each other's worlds. That's sort of a really simple, high level, about me. I've been doing it for 2 or 3 years. The restaurants are 30 years old and were started by my father. So, really long-standing sort of, community-based restaurants. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think when we talk to startup restaurants as well as restaurants that's been around for a while, or a similar scenario to you where the restaurant has been started by the father or grandfather and handed down, one thing that seems to be missing or at least be a weak area, whether they choose to admit it or not, are those back office systems. It's the accounting, it's the bookkeeping, it's all the things that you seem to be providing. So can you unpack some of the services that you offer and how you got started in offering them?
Yeah, so, it really comes back to, my dad, before starting our restaurant group, also was the CFO of Ilfreniyo and Gordon Biersch, two, fairly well-known restaurant groups, had a Stanford MBA. So, was used to really high quality financials, a lot more analysis. I think one of the challenges within the industry in general is that, for most restaurant owners are oftentimes come out of the culinary side or they come out of sort of their first generation or second generation immigrants to the country, and they may not have like a formal business school education. And so, it's one of those areas where there's sort of naturally just a weakness within the overall group, or overall sort of community around these services. So, the way we got started is we had one restaurant, large 200-seat restaurant in Larkspur, California, which is just north of San Francisco. We opened a second location down in Menlo Park, which is just south of the airport in San Francisco. And it went from, and this is a very common, story where, hey, restaurant owners wearing, a bunch of different hats, and a bunch of different sort of, hey, I'm the COO, I'm the CEO, I'm the CFO. This is a very common story on the founder side. Well, when you have 200-seat restaurants, it's not really functionally possible to do all of those roles all at the same time. So 26 years ago, he looked around, saw, hey, what do we have that's available out in the marketplace that could be a good support system? Was disappointed in the offerings. There was, obviously the big four sort of CPA accounting firms that existed at the time, but nothing that was really restaurant focused. And, there's definitely some unique challenges for restaurants, the volume of AP, the lack of accounts receivable. It's a different business, oftentimes custom financial calendars, 445, 544, all of these things also for probably some of your listeners are like, hey, what's this guy even talking about there? But, fundamentally looked for services, did not find any in the marketplace and decided, hey, I've got the expertise. I can develop develop a company, and that's sort of how Vine Solutions was born. And then Vine Solutions last year merged with KitchenSync, really with the goal of becoming the premier nationwide back office support company for independent restaurateurs. So, helping them scale, helping them grow, empowering them with data, and then not just giving them the data, but also providing services that help them leverage that data to deliver better results across their
Yeah.
business.
And I think that's the thing is like when you have one location, like you said, many times that person is basically wearing every hat in the C-suite. But then as soon as that second location opens, it really is, it exacerbates all of the weaknesses, all of the issues. You start to realize you are one human, and that you actually need help. But then it just seems like the consultants don't start at that level. Instead, they're like so much higher, so expensive, and like you said, not as nuanced and high touch enough. I think that restaurant owners need. How have you addressed that scenario and what you guys do? How do you offer that high touch and that expertise
Yeah,
with your clients?
so we really focus on offering a hybrid model because, as you say, it can get really expensive really quickly if you're bringing in high-powered consultants that have a great track record and whatnot. Most of the times, the consultants aren't going to be the ones doing the actual fulfillment work either, right? So all of a sudden, now you signed up for consultant, a fulfillment team. You just start adding these blocks on, and quickly the dollars go flowing out of the restaurant. And as we know, restaurants are not exactly the most margin-rich business in many cases. So, what we try to do is, and certainly think we're pretty successful at doing, but others can judge for that, is really employing a hybrid solution. So we're deploying technology first, wherever possible. If we can automate, something simple like pulling sales out of a POS and pushing those sales journal entries into the general ledger software, QuickBooks, Sage Intacct, one of the main accounting softwares. That's not something where there's going to be a lot of value add for a human to do that work. We want to audit it, make sure that the computer systems are doing things correctly, but there's not a lot of value add there. So, and we're also employing the same thing. We have an outsourced team that's overseas in Ahmedabad, India. So they're really handling the large sort of lifting portion of the core of bookkeeping, data entry, validation, validating some of that technology is working correctly, etc., so that the onshore team can really have time to spend with the clients, providing more of a customer service experience. We're in the hospitality industry, we're servicing hospitality. Most of our clients have an expectation of the level of service their teams need to provide to their guests. And as a back office provider in that space, our expectation internally is that our service expectations are in alignment with our customers. So we've got everybody from QSR, quick service, sort of fast casual places, all the way up through Michelin star restaurants. And obviously there's a wide gulf in the service that's expected between those, but really making sure there's a strong alignment there, so that somebody's got an onshore resource that they can pick up the phone and talk to. Hey, I saw this in the financials. Are we sure this is correct? My food cost shows that I've met 4%. Whatever that might look like, and they can get some quick answers so that they can make good, sound operational decisions off the data that they're receiving. And really doing so on a weekly cadence, as opposed to most financials are delivered currently on a monthly or custom financial period cadence, which leads you to making decisions with data that's 6 weeks old, kind of almost too stale for making those quick pivots and adjustments, which are so essential to profitability in our space.
Yeah. So I am sure this is the same with you. I definitely have experienced a lot of, let's say, horror stories. And I find that people sometimes learn better by learning what not to do than what to do. So with that in mind, what are some common issues that you see with restaurant leadership that causes failure or at the very least non-optimal results?
Yeah, I mean, so I think for us, the way I talk about sort of everything is the numbers are the foundation, right? So they can't sort of, if you've got good, accurate numbers with which to make decisions from, that's a really great starting point to be. Unfortunately, so many restaurants, because as we've already talked about, somebody's wearing 4 different, 5 different, 6 different hats. oftentimes the numbers are the last thing that they're looking at. They're they've got guests in the restaurant. They're touching tables. They're dealing with employee challenges. I mean, it's a never ending sort of source of various landmines or challenges. Vendors, are changing pricing or don't have availability. I mean, obviously, all of that's been specifically amplified by COVID, but it's that sort of shifting thing. So, for us, it really starts with the foundation of everything is the numbers. They don't lie. They don't get emotional. It is a very clear, hey, you're either making money or you're not, and here's the areas where you may or may not be impacting that. Right? You can dig into your labor. You can dig into your cost of goods sold, because it really comes down. A restaurant is in many ways really complex, but in many ways also very simple. It comes down to sales, cost of goods sold, and labor. And those are your three main sort of levers that you can pull as a business owner in the space. And obviously that's a gross simplification of what goes into all those things, but that's really the core three things you should be looking at, right? And many cases people are looking at their cost of goods sold and they're like, oh my God, I'm running a 40% food cost. But it's not actually the food cost that's the problem. It's the top line sale piece that may be the problem. And so they may find themselves going down and going down the wrong path, spending a lot of time looking in the wrong places for solutions. Like, oh man, if I can just, save some money on my cost of goods sold here, I'm going to deliver, some great financial results. Same is often very true for labor. Now, of course, the reverse can be true. You can be doing great top line revenue and still not dropping anything to the bottom line because you've got a cost of goods sold problem, or you've got a menu mix problem, pricing problem. There's a lot of different areas there. And so, for us, that core foundation is let's see what the numbers are doing today, because they're gonna give us a great ability of where to start, right? I can look and say, hey, is this a reasonable level of top line? Okay, yes, it is. Okay, cool. Then I can look at COGS and labor and expect that those numbers should be reasonable as well. And if they're not, it gives us something to dig into. And so that's, I think, one of the areas where so many providers in this space sort of do one or the other. They're the consultant, but they don't supply the core data, or they supply the core data but don't tell you, sort of give you some signposts or guidance about where you could go with that data. Hey, here's what your problem actually is. Let me help you shortcut that problem. Let's really focus on this over the next 30, 60, 90 days. And for us, you're going to hear me say hybrid a lot. Like, that's really where it comes down to is like, hey, we're going to give you the data. And if you've got a great operations team, you're a larger group, you've got an incredible director of ops, you might have some internal financial resources that are going to help your team, create budgets and all the other things that they can do. Great. We're a great solution for you there. But if you're, 1 to 3, 4 locations, probably don't have that resource in-house yet, but it's not that it's not useful or super essential. And oftentimes you can really kickstart growth and really juice profitability just by having somebody sort of guiding that tiller at the back of the boat and saying, hey, let's make sure we're pointing in the right direction. Let's make sure we're focused on the right things. And that's just one of those areas where we don't, there's not a lot of other companies that are sort of wanting to put a bow on it and wrap the pieces together, where it's like, hey, we've identified the issue and now we can, give you some solutions on how to solve the problem.
Yeah. So I want to, before we jump in a little bit further, because there's some important questions that I want to unpack. Suffice to say, listeners, none of this is financial advice. You should be speaking to your financial advisor, your accountant, or if you're looking for one, obviously call Alistair. However, what we're talking about is more high level, so it is not official financial advice. With that said, I want to ask, we've been coming up against, and I've heard from others, benchmarking here in 2022 as far as sales and numbers in general. And what I've come across is a number of folks who are benchmarking 2021 and then, of course, this year against 2019 as opposed to 2020, which my hot takes are it's off. It's not a good measure, mainly because 2021 was not necessarily a pandemic year. It was kind of hybrid in a lot of places, meaning we weren't locked down the way we were in 2020, but we certainly weren't back to the normal that we knew prior to the pandemic. From your level, from the way you're analyzing things, how are you tackling the problem of benchmarking? Because hey, it'd be great if we all slingshotted ahead with so much sales that it blew 2019 out of the way. But a lot of times I feel, from what I've seen, we're actually falling short of 2019 sales, but much better than 2020. How are you tackling that?
So the one thing I will just say first off is it really depends regionally where you are at, because that's one of the biggest things that's happened in both 2020, especially second half of 2020 and into 2021. If you're in Florida or maybe Georgia, where you guys
Georgia,
are, there's very minimal restrictions. If you're up in the Northeast, New York, or you're California, there were still extensive lockdown periods in parts of 2021. We started 2021 in California, still in lockdown through the end of 2020. With as we've gone through these wonderful waves and surges that we've all this terminology we all didn't know we needed, that we've all now become very familiar with, and so that I think that's really, it's not such a simple of, hey, there's one right answer. I think the other big thing to look at is what segment of the market are you operating in. If you're looking at fine dining, you had a very different environment in which to operate in than if you were QSR with a drive-thru. I mean, you were QSR with a drive-thru, your 2020 in many cases crushed 2020 or 2019, and 2021 in many cases was better, but again, could be regionally impacted. I have a friend with a pizza place in LA, and he was like, look, 2020 was one of the best years we ever had. We beat 2019 numbers by 30-35%. They opened multiple locations. It was almost ideal, right? You couldn't draw it up better. And then he saw a sharp decline at the start of 2021, or as we moved out of lockdown in California, in sort of February, March of 2021, because all of his customers had basically been only able to eat delivery for almost a year. And so, pizza is obviously high on that list of things that's getting delivered, Chinese food, etc. So that, he was like, look, everybody's wanting to go out and dine in, and sushi and all the other stuff that you maybe didn't feel comfortable having delivered became, much hotter. And, oh man, what a new thing to be able to go out and dine in again, and have somebody wait on you and not have to do the dishes or pack up the garbage or any of the other stuff after taking a delivery. So, I think there's a lot. It's not such a simple answer. I mean, for a lot of our clients, what we did is for 2021's budgets and for now 2022's budgets, we've looked at taking a hybrid approach where we took some of what the numbers from 2019 and some of the numbers from 2020. For 2021 budgets, certainly that was the case for a lot of clients, as we did for the first half of the year as a 2020 budget, not necessarily back to the early days of where everything was in full lockdown, but right after that. And then we sort of layered in some 2019 for Q3, Q4. Unfortunately, we had another Omicron surge, and so that heavily disrupted some people's Q4s. For a lot of our clients, they were able to sort of weather that and just had an impact right after in early January, which was clearly ideal for those that's where that worked out for. But yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to watch how highly regionalized this has been. I mean, even within the state of California, if you go out to the Central Valley, you're not likely to see masks in place and people are out. Life sort of feels semi-normal versus if you're in San Francisco or LA or one of the sort of true coastal cities, you're going to still see mask mandates, etc. So, I think that's where, again, this is where having a team of professionals is super helpful who can look at, we support about 400 restaurant locations. We can look at a much larger sample size, and sort of make some decisions that aren't just sort of in an individual location or a small collection of locations. But yeah, there's not one easy, simple answer that's like, hey, this is the right way to do it. As always, it's worth looking at the data and having the data inform sort of that decision.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think what's interesting as well is there's the literal impediments, that, like some of which you mentioned, which is mask mandates, shutdowns, no on-prem dining, and all of that. And we saw a number of things happen as a result. There's, of course, behavioral shifts, like you said. the drive-throughs were a savior. I mean, if you had a drive-through, we saw this firsthand. You were thumping during the pandemic.
100%.
But also a drastic shift to off-prem dining, delivery, so on and so forth. But when you take away those very objective impediments, there's an underlying behavior that I think not a lot of folks are talking about, which is the reticence or the hesitance to go back, even though you're allowed to now. It's more, well, I'm more comfortable getting it home now, and COVID's still a thing, so I really don't want to go to the location. And that's something that we have been trying to fight as well. And that definitely has some influences on the those sales and how you're benchmarking and how you're measuring overall.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what customer segment you're serving, right? I mean, if you've got younger consumers, they've shown a much larger willingness to come back in droves. Versus if you've got older consumers, they're potentially far more concerned because the impact could be death as opposed to what from a younger generation in general is more sort of flu, cold. Not that there's not exceptions to that, but broad statistically speaking, that's sort of what the outcomes look like. So I think that plays a huge role. But look, I think consumer behavior is also fundamentally changed. You don't have behavior exist one way for 18 months, 2 years, depends again regionally where you are. But that's a lot of time to retrain behavior, right? I mean, I think, I forget what they say it is to create a new habit. It's 30 days of doing the same thing. I mean, you have well in excess of new habit forming behavior. And a lot of it was driven by convenience. I mean, you think about how groceries are being delivered now that did not have widespread adoption. You have Uber Eats and DoorDash. That those things sort of went mainstream, or didn't sort of. They went mainstream through as a result of the pandemic. And I continue to think that there's a lot of restaurants out there that are still sort of expecting to go back to 2019. I think we all sort of fondly look back on it now with wishful thinking. We still have lots of issues with challenges with finding bodies and labor to work in the restaurants. We had many of the same issues that we're encountering today, a little less of inflation, but other than that, very similar. And yet, I think we've all sort of collectively forgotten about that. And I think a lot of people haven't necessarily updated their business models to reflect that, we're moving from a traditional model of on-prem to all on-premise dining, driving that to a full omni-channel model, which is the same thing that happened to retail 10 years ago. I mean, you saw, hey, it used to be you'd go down to your local store, you'd buy whatever you were going to buy, and then Amazon and Etsy and Walmart and Shopify all launched large, third-party aggregation, effectively businesses. Amazon doesn't sell most of the stuff on Amazon is not shipped and sold by Amazon. It's by other sellers fulfilled by them. And so, the same is going to happen with restaurants. We're already seeing that. DoorDash and Uber Eats are playing a very similar role to Amazon and others, where they're generating a huge amount of foot traffic digitally. They become sort of the marketplace that you start your search for. I mean, this is exactly what Amazon did, where it was like, hey, I need to go order something. Oh, well, I'm a Prime member. I'm going to go on Amazon Prime and order it. We're seeing exactly the same thing. Dash Pass, Eats Pass on Uber Eats, etc. Then we're going to see the same sort of issues in the marketplace where those middle ground brands, the Sears, if you will, the JCPenney's, if you will, on the retail side, struggled mightily because there wasn't a strong, compelling reason with which to go to them for a worse, less convenient experience than there was to just order online. And then you had brands, that have done well, that are, direct to consumer. There's all this new opportunity that comes out of that as well. So, I think we're just entering the sort of initial phase of that in the restaurant space. We're going to start looking at, revenue per square foot will become a big metric because, especially if you're in the QSR space, you should expect, I think Chipotle said they did on their most recent quarterly report, 50-something% of their sales were outside the four walls, were a takeout or delivery transaction. Jack in the Box's CEO has come out and said 98% of their sales are either delivery or drive-through sales, and they don't anticipate building more restaurants with internal seating going forward. And so, when we look at all of those types of things, and look, those are obviously two very large things. They're not independent restaurants, but it sort of, it gives us a good barometer of where we can anticipate that the world might end up. We've got ghost kitchens, all this stuff. There's these changes. But I think what's really critical for the independent restaurant space to really think about is how are you providing an exceptional experience for your guests that's differentiated? And then you're going to need to embrace some of these online ordering technologies. I'm not necessarily saying go on DoorDash or Uber Eats, but what is your native delivery solution? What is your native online ordering solution? Because what you really want to own is those customer relationships. You're able to market to them. You're able to sell to them. You can identify who they are. Hey, I'm having a lot of customers coming from a certain portion of the city where I don't currently have a location. Oh, that would be a great spot to open another second location, right? You can better believe that DoorDash and Uber Eats and all of those companies are heavily leveraging data and are going to start competing directly. They're already starting this with existing independent restaurants. And so, I think there's an area where we need to update sort of our own internal models that will we will have a model that will look different than it looked like in 2019.
Yeah, I see it as well. I mean, especially because you can get such great food so quickly delivered to your door. The question becomes like, why should I want to sit in your restaurant? And that's not meant to be provocative in a negative way. It's meant to be a challenge. Like, it should be worthwhile. And in a situation sort of like, hey, I got this hamburger from this place. It's pretty great. And your friend says, yeah, but you got to eat it there because X, Y, and Z. Something remarkable.
Or service, or there's live music, or there's some sort of like the vibe is a big. Everybody talks about, oh man, that place has got a serious vibe, right? You want to go and hang out. It's sort of your spot. You feel comfortable there. Look, I think fundamentally we're social creatures. We want to hang out with other people. I mean, not all of us do all the time, but definitely there's an element of like we want to hang out with other people. And so I think where I see sort of those third-party aggregators, are going to continue to sort of they're going to own 20-25% of the meal period market. The other big thing that sort of pay attention to is grocery gained a lot of market share during the pandemic and have moved heavily into prepared foods. And so, you go in your average Whole Foods now or whatever your sort of regional local chain is that does a similar thing. Almost a third of that store now is prepared foods of various sorts, right? They've got the taqueria, they've got the pizzeria, they've got the deli, they've got, all the hot bar, the cold bar, the salad bar, and then all the prepared heat and serve section, right? Those are all direct competitors of restaurant spaces and restaurant meal periods. And so, again, it's all driven by convenience. There's some ghost kitchen operators that have opened now in Ralph's in Southern California. You can place your order when you walk in, do all your grocery shopping, pick up a hot meal ready to take home that was cooked fresh for you. I mean, that's definitely something that's going to come. They can bundle those delivery transactions with other food as well. Hey, I'm ordering from Instacart. I'm ordering my week's groceries as well as dinner for tonight because I'm just not going to have time. I think the other thing we're going to see is, hey, you're a busy working mom or dad. You're on your way home from the office. You've swung by, picked up the kids from soccer practice, and you're sitting in traffic for half an hour to get home. Well, hey, you can pull out your phone. You can make a quick decision on dinner. Everybody can order what they want, and it's sitting there when you get home or shortly thereafter. That's a behavior that's not going to go away. I mean, I think especially as we see return to work, you still have tons of people working remotely. You still have some limited, again, regionally, all of this is different, but you still have, some limitations in many cases on extracurricular activities for kids. As all of that comes roaring back, and we know it will, that time pressure is going to come back, and there's going to continue to be those opportunities there to address those consumers who are busy and who don't have time to cook.
Yeah, that's great thinking. And I see it as well. I do see a world too where the brands or just the restaurants that have simply opened with the baseline need of servicing sustenance, they really are going to fall away. There's just nothing remarkable. I think the ghost kitchens or the cloud kitchens are going to eat them up. You did mention something earlier that I'd like to unpack before we land this plane, and it was something about labor. And I think this is a big hot topic right now. We're having a labor problem. It persists. Some of it, I think, is the problem of the restaurant industry as a whole. But it tends to get zeroed in on we don't pay people enough for a certain group, and that another group says, no, that's just the way the market works, whatever. I'd love to know what camp you're in when it comes to minimum wage and what you think the repercussions of a federal minimum wage could do, positive or negative.
I mean, I think truthfully, the minimum wage is already fundamentally moved, whether the federal one is moved or not. You look at a company like Amazon, who's hiring hundreds of thousands, millions of people. They're paying $15 an hour as a starting, minimum wage. You look at a large group like In-N-Out, they've moved their minimum wage heavily. There are multiple large franchisor or franchisees that have done similar things now. Again, look, there's some regional variation, but in general, I think that ship has sort of sailed, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. I think, where it changes from a federal minimum wage standpoint is how that impacts salaried employees, which is a more complex sort of issue of, hey, this person's salary and they've got to make a certain multiple of the hourly minimum wage. That's not sort of yet being felt, but certainly will be. So I think, look, I think that, again, everybody can fight or whatever else. I think the horse is out of the barn on the $15 an hour sort of minimum. And then if you're in a large city and you want to hire a dishwasher, you want to hire a line cook, you're just not finding them for that price point. And so the question is, would you like the person or would you not like the person? And, for most people, they want the person. I think, what we're going to see, and this is going to be the challenge, is I think, historically 35% food cost and 25% labor cost to get you to your 60% prime cost was the sort of, that was the way the model worked for a great variety of full service restaurants, right? I think what we're going to see is that labor is going to eclipse the cost of goods sold, and you're going to have a flip, and you're going to see more like 25% food cost and more like 35% labor cost. I think that's really already happened or is happening, but not everybody's updated their models, updated their budgets to sort of reflect that that's the case. And look, I think in some categories there's going to be a bunch of automation. I think that it'll be curious to see how that plays out. Just because, if you're a fast food restaurant, your model sort of only supports certain things. So, I think there's a lot of moving pieces. I think anytime you put pressure in a specific area, you're going to have unintended consequences. And so, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But I mean, fundamentally, if you're willing to pay, you're going to find people to fill your jobs. If you're not willing to pay, you're going to struggle to do that. And, we can see that over and over again with national news story after national news story. And, I think there's also a bunch of people who are still sitting on the sidelines as we go through wave after wave. Maybe they have, at-risk populations at home. Maybe they themselves are at risk. And then I think there's been a big regional reshuffling where if, you were a hospitality employee, were you going to sit and hang out in California and see when the restrictions were going to ease, or were you going to look to go to Arizona or Las Vegas or somewhere else, right? And I think the same is true on the East Coast. Did you hang out in New York City or no? Florida, all of a sudden, Miami. I mean, you can see this. What's happening. Look at the sheer number of restaurants that have opened in Miami from the pandemic forward, and look at how many of those are run by New York operators who are sort of looking for other opportunities, right? And I'm sure that's happening in Atlanta. I mean, it's definitely, but then there's been some regional reshuffling. We've seen that in congressional seats and how those have changed as well. So yeah, I mean, I think, look, our industry, the great part about it is we will take absolutely anybody. If you've got a checkered past and you're willing to show up and work hard and show up on time, we're gonna take you in. We're gonna help teach you some skills, and we're gonna give you, potentially a great career depending on sort of what that looks like for you. And certainly, there's plenty of opportunity in the space. And I think we, as an industry, do a terrible job sort of telling people. I mean, we're oftentimes the first job for most people. It's retail or us. Retail's really fallen off, so it's oftentimes now us. Right? You're 16 years old, you're 17 years old, you're working at a fast food place, whatever that looks like. Or the same is true for sort of first generation, second generation immigrants, the same kind of deal. Like we're the foot in the door on the path towards that American dream. And one of the few sort of industries I would say where that's still pretty readily achievable, where you can start out as an hourly dishwasher and work your way up, and get to a point where you could potentially own your own business. It might start out small, it might be a taco truck, it might be something like that, but that is still a very realistic pathway within our industry, and we just don't talk about it that much. We don't promote it that much. We sort of let the large chains and franchisors really tell our story for us, and it's very different than the independent space where there's that sort of feeling of family. Oftentimes, most of those independents are run by a family, so they're using a lot of family labor as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the other pieces is we've got to do a better job telling our story to the potential next generation of candidates, let's say, who are still in high school or community college or middle school or whatever, and get them excited about what the industry can provide for them, because it can be a lot of fun. It's a lot of hard work. It can be a lot of fun, and I think we've sort of gotten a bad reputation because we have some definite bad actors in the space.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's what you touched on is pretty strong. And I think a lot of brands, a lot of leaders, they go right to the money. And this is what you could make. It's so flat and so one dimensional when there are so many other dimensions in this industry. Like you said, that the paths ahead are plentiful. And no one really talks about it enough. I mean, I would say I would even challenge the larger corporations to do a better job of it as well. Because this really is a place where you can come in unskilled and you could thrive. And it truly is maybe one of the last areas where meritocracy is alive and kicking. And with that, with the minimum wage conversation, I'm a proponent of letting the market decide. And I've been vocal about this in that if you do a federal minimum wage, well, $15 an hour in LA is below poverty.
Yeah.
$15 in Bentonville, Arkansas is a pretty good living.
Yeah.
And so you just can't have this one size fits all across the nation. And I think what you mentioned is all the influences out there really are the free market at play. Florida stayed open. Some people maybe hate that. Some people probably love that. But the fact is you're seeing people go to where the opportunity is. And, I've heard this said before, and I always laugh when I hear it. And I agree with it. There is a minimum wage. It's zero. If you put a job out there for no pay and someone takes it, that's the minimum wage. And I think what you've alluded to is people in some of these cities like LA, they will not take that job because it will not get them what they need to live. And so the free market works, in my opinion.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think where the only thing I would say about having a minimum is it does prevent some of those bad actors from taking advantage of some of the populations that our industry naturally attracts. Those first generation immigrants who maybe don't know what the legal requirements are, that don't know what some of those other pieces are. I do think that there needs to be more of a conversation with legislation than there is currently, because and there needs to be some more nuance. Unfortunately, one of the biggest problems is, legislation is passed by people who lobby for legislation. Those people are generally the ones who are most able to deal with compliance, whereas the independent operators are least able to deal with it. And they're generally not trying to do the wrong thing. Again, there's definitely bad actors. There should be a look at, hey, is this person a serial bad actor? Or, hey, I screwed up. I didn't realize the law changed a few months ago, and all of a sudden now I'm underpaying my person. Clearly not ideal, but wasn't clearly my intention, right? And I think people underestimate, in general, sort of voting populace underestimates the sheer quantity. We see this on our HR compliance side, the sheer quantity of laws and legislation that changes. And it's different. If I'm zooming into a restaurant in Santa Barbara has different requirements than Ventura County, has different requirements than the state of California. Right. And so there's all of this like local nuance. And it's like, hey, you may not realize you're opening another location slightly in a different county in a different town. Oh, man, there's like this whole extra set of compliance piece there. And so, I think fundamentally it all goes back to, look, if you treat your employees well, they're going to stay. I mean, I think in general, we also have a problem where we've assumed that churn and turnover is just part of the cost of doing business. And most restaurants have a more than 100% yearly turnover rate. It's really hard to build a successful, stable business when you're churning through employees that way. and I think we undervalue sort of, not all of us, but it's definitely a good chunk of the industry undervalues sort of what some of the employees can, what the employees can bring to the table. Now, don't get me wrong, there's also plenty of problems there, plenty of challenges there as well. But I think, having a stable crew, you look at, Danny Meyer was a big proponent of this, and then he sort of reneged on his promise, unfortunately, when the pandemic hit, and has created a bunch of ill will there. But, there are definitely groups that have that, cohesiveness as a clear portion of their sort of corporate ethos. I mean, I think Chick-fil-A has done this in an incredibly effective manner, and look at the results they've delivered. Look at I haven't seen a lot of articles about Chick-fil-A saying they can't hire. I haven't seen a lot of social media posts around people walking off the job at Chick-fil-A, but I have seen that certainly for Wendy's, and, Starbucks is unionizing and all these other things. And I think, it's because Chick-fil-A does a great job, and they certainly have plenty of controversy surrounding them in other places, but they do a great job because they only sell franchises to people who worked at a Chick-fil-A for a set amount of time. And, those people can get a couple franchises and they can really, make an incredible living. And they do an great job promoting that to consumers, promoting that internally. And I think you look at their retention and you look at their hiring and what that's done for it. Not that they don't have churn, but that there definitely is a core sort of backbone of that company that really has delivered some exceptional results on the back of sort of that model. And I think that, I'm not, I'll be surprised if I don't see more companies sort of employ similar models.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good assessment too. I think if even the small operators or independent owners, if they actually just take a minute to try to do some quick maths on the napkin about what it takes to actually train somebody, onboard somebody, make sure that they're learning versus losing that person, I think they'll start to see that a little bit of extra effort in keeping them on board is worth the money, worth the effort, because that's in every industry. The training takes out way more than I think people realize if you really sit down and think about it.
It's just not something our industry values super highly, because we've all sort of just assumed you're just gonna have churn, and I think giving also the team a really clear path to promotion. Hey, here's what that looks like. Here's the opportunities, and that creates a great. People want to, look. Very few people want to show up to work and doing a bad job. They're usually not armed with how to do a good job or given clear metrics about what that looks like. And so, to me, I think that's really where it starts as sort of business owners and restaurant owners, is like, what does a good job look like? And how do you give your team a path to advancement and promotion? They're going to, they're going to start again, 16, 17, 18 years old. How do you give that sort of busser, dishwasher, prep cook, hostess, etc., a path to, hey, here's, if you did this right for a year or two, here's how you get bumped to server, or here's how you get bumped to line cook, or, then after that it's CDC, or, sous chef, or, grill station, whatever that may be for any individual concept, giving a clear path, and then following through, like, hey, if you do this, this is what the reward will be. Really, that drives a lot of retention. It drives excitement. It gets people who want to come to work every day and deliver. They're going to deliver exceptional results for you, because they're invested in the outcome. So yep. I think that's, again, the area where we see that done really well in single unit family restaurants. And we see it done pretty well at some of the large players like Chick-fil-A. And then everybody else sort of just has slightly lost the plot on it.
Yeah. Well, let's hope, I think with good consultants such as yourselves and other ones out there preaching this word, hopefully people start to get on board and make some good changes, because this industry is changing, like we've just talked about, in so many ways. Those that don't see it and react well and pivot, to use a word that's been overused for the last few years, but pivot accordingly, I think won't really be around for much longer. But those that actually see the writing on the wall, get the right partners at the table, I really do think can thrive and continue their growth forward. Alistair, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous, and of course your brain. How do people get in touch with you? How do they find KitchenSync?
Yeah, so if you come to KitchenSync, that's sync.us, not .com.us, website there. There's a contact page which actually comes directly to me. You can book time pretty easily on my calendar. Or you can send me an email. It's Alistair, which is ALI, and then stair like a staircase, STAIR @kitchensync.us as well. Those are the two best ways to reach out. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, and lovely conversation.
If you love what we served up, please follow us at Vigor Branding on Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Medium. Forktales is produced by the team at Vigor. Audio and video post-productions provided by Zencaster. Music performed by Jet Trash and licensed through musicbed.com. Joseph handles his own hair, makeup, and stunts. Copyright 2003 to 2021, Vigor Graphic Design, LLC, all rights reserved.